I'm Jessica Beheit with Cabrini Green Legal Aid, which is CGLA. So normally we start off the presentation just telling you a little bit about our organization. I don't want to take too much time doing that, but we, as an organization, started and we just served the tenants of Cabrini Green Housing Project. We started in a church basement back in 1973. We now serve all of Chicago, Chicagoland, and we frequently go around giving these kinds of presentations. So the work that we primarily focus on is criminal records relief. So for the most part, my job is helping people get expungements for their criminal records or sealing their criminal records. My colleague up front here is Rhonda Briggs, another attorney. This is also her job. So today I'm going to be talking about some types of relief that you can get before you're eligible to expunge or seal your record. So some people need to wait at least 3 years before they can seal a criminal record, sometimes longer. Depends on what you were convicted of, depends on how long your sentence was. So in the meantime, you might be feeling kind of down about that and feeling like you can't really do anything. So this presentation is to show you some things that might be available to you while you're waiting. We call them alternative forms of relief. It's really clever. All right, so the alternative forms of relief that we're here today to talk about help you get to help you get a specific job. So if you didn't know already, if you want to be a nursing aid assistant, if you want to be a home health care aide, and these are unlicensed positions working in a healthcare field, and you have certain convictions, you cannot take that job. Park districts, if you have any felony within the last 7 years, you cannot work for the Chicago Park District. Same with the schools, if you have any, you can't be a teacher, administrator, or volunteer if you want to volunteer with your kid's school. You cannot get that if you have had a felony in the last 7 years. Medical Practices Act, very similar with the felony. That's nursing, usually nursing, other medical practices like an anesthesiologist, any kind of ultrasound tech, anything that requires a license. And then the financial services industry. So if you want to work at a bank or a credit union, some felonies and some misdemeanors will disqualify you from working there. We can help you get a healthcare worker waiver. So this is something where the Illinois Department of Public Health actually waives your disqualifying conviction and lets you take that job.
How many times can you get it waived?
You should only need to get it waived.
I have a problem. I done had mine waived every time I go in the field. I help home care.
Oh, are you saying waive for each employer?
Yes.
There's no limit on that.
So the same employee that I work for should not redo okay.
They should. But if you're having issues, you can talk to me after the presentation.
Okay.
We can see what's going on. That doesn't sound right. Certificates of good conduct and certificates of relief from disability. These are, we call them certificates of rehabilitation. So these will help you get a license for a specific profession. So if you want to be a barber, you want to go to cosmetology school, if you want to get your real estate license, and for some reason you have a disqualifying conviction, you can get one of these certificates from a judge, and then that will waive that disqualifying conviction for you so that you can get that license. FDIC waivers, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, I think is what that stands for. But anyways, this is a federal law that says if you have certain convictions, you cannot work in a bank or a credit union. This is actually what I specialize in. So if you have one of those disqualifying convictions, we can help you apply for a waiver so that you can then work at a bank or credit union.
So, I just recently got an app working at Amazon. Y'all can help us get that type of job too?
Amazon is a little different. So Amazon's a private company, and what we've been talking about so far has been like healthcare workers, right? It's a very specific field, and these are for licenses in a very specific field. A certificate of good conduct can help for a private employer, but they need to understand what a certificate of good conduct is for it to be helpful. So specifically, this type of relief can be more generally helpful for a private employer instead of a license, because what it does is it protects the employer from getting sued for negligent hiring. So usually this comes up with theft, right? So if you have a theft conviction, for whatever reason, that's worse for a lot of employers than a lot of other types of convictions. They think that that's liability. If you show them the certificate of good conduct and you're like, hey, under the law, if I have this, you can't be sued if I steal again, right? You can't be held liable for that. So sometimes that can help you get a job, like Amazon or like some other private employer, but only if they understand what that is. So sometimes we can like send a letter, talk to the hiring manager, we can kind of explain it and see if they think that'd be helpful, and then help you go through that process. And then clemency. Clemency is a pardon from the governor. This one is the hardest to get just because it takes the longest, and it's a really long application process. And usually you want to be about 10 years away from having any arrest on your record. So clemency, we're not going to really talk about clemency today, because like I said, what we're focusing on are those like 1 to 7 years after your last conviction where you're waiting to get your record expunged or sealed. And that's where the rest of these come in.
Well, this is my third time dealing with Cabrini Green, and my thing is over 17 years old, and I'm still having the same problems.
Yeah, this is the second thing that's an issue, so let's definitely look up your case after.
Okay.
And we'll take a look at that. That doesn't sound bad. All right. So we're going to dive in a little bit more to healthcare worker waiver, and so what that means and how you get it. So again, non-licensed, so you don't need this if you want to be a nurse. It's certified nursing assistant, home health aide, other positions with healthcare. All right. So in Illinois, there is the Healthcare Worker Background Check Act that prohibits healthcare employers from hiring you if you have certain convictions. And these convictions are listed out by statute, so it's very specific what kind of convictions you cannot have. The Illinois Public Department of Health is also required to keep an online public registry of anybody who is registered to work as a healthcare waiver and anybody who's applied for a waiver or who has received a waiver. So we'll look at that website in a moment. Personal care aides and CNAs, I covered that. All right, so this is the website. You guys probably cannot read this. It's not that important that you see the website. It's just that you should know all of this is available online. And so unlike other things with like a judge where you don't know what's going on in the process, you're waiting, with a healthcare worker waiver, you apply and then everything, your status as far as where you are in the process is online. So it's a little easier to know what's going on and whether it's been approved or not. It also shows whether you have passed any kind of exam. So if you needed to pass an exam to be a CNA, you can see here, this has a CNA license, another CNA at a different institute. And so it provides all that information for your work history. All right, so as I mentioned, there are certain convictions that prevent you from working as a CNA or a personal health care aide or a home health care aide. These are some of these convictions. These are the most common ones, right? So misdemeanor, theft, which I kind of talked about a little bit, criminal trespass, assault, battery, domestic battery, probably the most common. Felonies, that would be the most common, unlawful restraint, another felony theft or felony forgery. And then if you have any of these convictions, murder, any kind of sexual offense, always a sexual offense with a child, any kind of aggravated offense, usually aggravated battery that resulted in any kind of injury, these are automatically denied for your waiver, but then you go through an appeal process. So it's not that you can't get the waiver, it's just that it's a little bit longer of a process compared to the misdemeanors and felonies that are listed here. And now, if you have a conviction on your record and you don't see it up here, you might not need a waiver, but that's something that an attorney can talk to you about. So if you're being denied a position, somebody's telling you, hey, you got a conviction, I can't hire you, you can always come back and be like, well, it's actually not a disqualifying conviction, I talked to my attorney, right? So that's something that an attorney can walk you through at CGLA. All right, now the important part. How long do you have to wait to get a healthcare waiver? So this is the number of disqualifying offenses. So remember, it's not how many convictions you have on your record total, it's how many convictions you have that meet one of these requirements. So let's say you have one theft misdemeanor, that's it. You have to wait 1 year before you can apply for a healthcare waiver. That's 1 year from the date of conviction. If you have 2 to 3 misdemeanors, you need to wait 3 years. And then if you have a felony conviction, it ends up taking a little longer. So if you have 1 felony conviction, it's 3 years, 2 to 3, it's 5 years. This can still be available to you if you're waiting on an expungement and sealing process. There's lots of reasons why you might not be eligible to seal something right now. And so this is definitely something to keep in mind. I know it still seems like a long time, but it can still be helpful to you before you get your record expunged and sealed. All right, the process. The process for this is pretty straightforward, I'll say. I've done it a couple times now. So you fill out an application and you pull together supporting documentation. Supporting documentation is usually a list of all the disqualifying convictions you have, and then an explanation for those convictions. So whatever the explanation was, I was young and dumb and I stole something from the store, or I was with my friends and everybody was doing, literally whatever your story is around it. It doesn't even have to be an excuse, just your explanation of how that happened and why it happened. And then you send that in to the healthcare registry. That can be sent by mail or email. Email's usually easier and quicker. And then you go and get your fingerprints taken. That's all paid for, but you have to get an official fingerprint taken just so that they can confirm that those convictions match up with the ones that you talked about in your application. And then after that, the registry meets as a committee and they decide which ones to waive. I'll tell you that a vast majority of these get approved. What's the word I'm looking for? It's unusual for these to be denied. Usually if they're denied, it's because there's some kind of violence that's a recent conviction. So especially if you're working like as a home health care aide and you have a conviction that's specifically a conviction preying on the elderly, they may want you to wait a little bit longer before giving you that waiver. But otherwise, this is usually a pretty simple process, and it's something that'll qualify for. So this is what the Illinois Department of Public Health considers for these waivers. How old you were at the time of the offense versus how old you are now. Like I said, that written explanation of each conviction, that's pretty self-explanatory. Your work history, if you were a CNA for like 10 years, you got a conviction, and you're like, this is the only way I make money, I really need to be a CNA again, they're way more likely to give you this waiver. But other work history, generally they just want to see that you've been trying to work if you can. If you can't, usually you want to put in your written explanation, hey, I've been trying to apply for jobs, but this conviction is really holding me back. I really think getting this CNA healthcare waiver would be really helpful so I can work. You have to complete your entire sentence. Employment and character references, these aren't necessary, but they can be helpful. So like if you're currently working and your supervisor will write you a letter, that's excellent. Character references, friends, family, pastors, somebody here at Phalanx. We get letters from all kinds of people. Anything that just shows like, hey, this person is trustworthy, I would give them this position, please give them this waiver. Okay, again, pretty much the same thing. You have to give your work history, you have to prove that you completed your sentence. The case disposition is basically just your list of convictions. And then any information on any convictions in another state. I think that's the only thing I didn't mention. Yeah, any questions about healthcare waivers? This is something Cabrini Green Legal Aid can help with, but you can also fill out this application yourself online. The Illinois Public Department of Health has the application available on their website. And so as long as you provide all the information that they're asking for, and even if you don't, they'll call you and they'll say, hey, I'm missing this. Can you go and get this provided to me? So as long as you are responsive to your email or you're answering the phone when they call, usually you can walk yourself through this process as well. Optional, but highly recommended additions, again, kind of talked about this. Information about your life outside of the conviction, why you want to work in healthcare, and your ability to be a competent employee. Really, that's what the healthcare waiver is about. They just don't want to give you a waiver and then you go on the job and have an issue, right? So if you have letters from people that confirm that you're a competent employee, that they would trust you, that's really good. Your life outside of the conviction. Are you a parent? Do you have kids? Are you helping your mom at home? Is your grandma sick? You know, what kind of person are you? Do you have hobbies? Do you like to volunteer on the weekends? Do you go to church on Sundays? That kind of stuff can really help humanize you on what can otherwise be a pretty obnoxious process of like opening up your entire life to the Illinois Department of Public Health. And so trying to have some modicum of I'm a human in this application can really be helpful as well. All right, certificates of rehabilitation. This is what we talked about before. The certificates of good conduct, that's the one that waives the negligent hiring lawsuits, and then certificates of relief from disabilities. All right, good conduct. These are specific for statutory barriers and then can also be generally applicable, but this would be specifically if you want to work in a school. So right now I'm working on one for one of my clients who wants to be a janitor at a high school. She was there for a long time, ran a background, and they fired her. So now we're going to try and get a certificate of good conduct so that she can go back and work, be a Board of Education employee working as a janitor at that school. So it's not just teachers, and it's not just teachers' aides, right? A lot of these statutes prevent you from having any kind of position with a school or a park district. Waiting period is 2 years from the completion of a felony or 1 year from completion of a misdemeanor conviction. So much shorter waiting period than that healthcare waiver. So just 2 years and 1 year for a misdemeanor. Certificates of relief from disability. This is the one that has no waiting period whatsoever. So you can get this while you're on probation. You can get this if you had a felony conviction yesterday. Now, do I think you're going to actually successfully get this if you had a felony conviction yesterday? Maybe. I would work with an attorney if it was really that close of a time period. But the most important thing for this is that it's specific for professional licenses. So like I said, if you want to get your real estate license, if you want to become a barber, cosmetologist, I've got a list here before I forget. It's all specifically laid out in the statutes. So if you want to be a counselor, if you want to do, if you want to be somebody like a personal trainer, martial arts kind of personal trainer, if you want to work as an electrician, or if you want to do plumbing, dietitian, nutritionist, these are all the professional licenses that you might need. Like if you want to become an accountant, a geologist, for whatever reason this is on here, an auction. And then the last one that I have actually helped somebody with is a mortician's license. So if you want to work at a funeral home and you need a mortician's license, this can be helpful for that as well. Any questions on, or does anybody have any professional licenses they want to know about?
I wanted to know, how do you go about getting a certificate?
I think that's next on my list, I think. Anybody have any professional licenses they want me to look at this list and see if it's on here before I go on? No, you're stretching. Okay. All right, so how do you get them? So you apply through the court where you were convicted. So you'll submit an application, it's called a petition. The same thing as an application. It's a petition for a certificate of good conduct or relief from disabilities. These convictions are disqualifying. So if you have any of these convictions on your record, you cannot get a certificate of good conduct or a certificate of relief from disabilities. Now, important here, this is aggravated DUI, so not just a regular DUI, and also aggravated domestic battery. So if you have a regular DUI or regular domestic battery, you can still get these certificates. These are the aggravated convictions are what don't, or are what disqualify you. And these are usually felonies too, so you'll know. So if you had a misdemeanor domestic battery, that's not going to disqualify you. Arson, aggravated arson, aggravated kidnapping, and then holding true with the healthcare waiver thing, sex offender, murder, arson, you know, your heavy hitters, those are disqualifying. Okay, talked about this a little bit. Benefits of these certificates: immunity from negligent hiring claims is provided to certificate holders. So like I said, that's really helpful for private employers, usually if they're nervous about hiring you, because you have usually a theft conviction. That's honestly the most common issue. That shows them they can't be sued for hiring you if something goes wrong, and that is usually enough for them to feel comfortable hiring you. It also removes specific statutory barriers. So there are actual laws that say, for example, you cannot work for the Board of Education if you have a felony conviction. You can get those specific statutory barriers removed by getting one of these certificates. And then the other thing that's really helpful, I think, about these certificates is that if you're one of like 100 people who are applying and a lot of you have convictions on your record, not everybody's going to have this certificate. So even if your like Amazon employer doesn't know what a certificate of good conduct like does for them, they don't know that it protects them from liability, they're still going to see that a judge said, yeah, this person has been working hard enough that they deserve a certificate of good conduct. Right? You're going to a court and having a judge sign off on your good character. And what better, like what else would an employer want to see as far as you can handle this, you are trustworthy, you should be given this job, right? It's like the ultimate character reference. All right, the process. So like I said, you prepare the written petition. Petition is just another word for application. It's just whatever you submit to the court. You file it in the court of conviction, and there is no filing fee. So you fill it out, you walk to the clerk's office, and you ask for it to be filed in the case where you were last convicted. The clerk will help you figure out how to serve the state's attorney, and then they'll schedule a court date for you. And then this is the most important part, you have to go to the court date. So make sure you write it several times all over the place, wherever, don't lose it. Go to the court date, and that's where the judge will make a decision. So that's where you get to talk to the judge about why this should be granted. You can bring letters from your friends and family, from supervisors, why this should be granted. But it's at that hearing that you're really convincing the judge you deserve this certificate. All right, any questions before I move on to
Do you have another packet?
Do I have another packet? They do, I believe.
You want this?
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions about certificates? Okay. FDIC waivers. Again, you fill out an application, you mail it in, and we see it. No. So the difference between the FDIC waiver application and certificates application is that this is getting sent to an agency. So it's not, a judge is not reviewing whether this should be granted. It's a federal agency that's deciding whether to give you this waiver. The similarities far outweigh the differences though, because you're submitting the exact same documents. So you're still getting a list of your criminal history. You're writing out that explanation for your convictions, and you're getting letters of support from friends, family, coworkers, supervisors, everything. So you're noticing that it's basically all the same documentation, it's all the same support. The biggest difference is who we're sending it to and who we're trying to convince for you. So the FDIC waiver does require an FBI background check. CGLA can help you get that. It's also just a fingerprint report that you go to any fingerprint-based company, they'll get that for you. And then we email that off for you and then help you convince them to grant that. All right, clemency, like I said before, this is the one that takes the longest. It's really the ultimate way to get a conviction removed from public view. So if this is something that people ask for, if they so convictions can only be sealed, for example, but if you get it pardoned from the governor or you get executive clemency, then it's completely gone. It never happened. So that's a lot better than getting it sealed. It does take a long time, and it's a lengthy process as far as all of the paperwork you have to fill out. If this is something you're interested in, come see me afterwards though. I do have a law firm that handles these, and we can give you their information so that they can help you out. Currently, there's about a 3-year wait for executive clemency petitions, just so you know. This is not something you can read very clearly, but it's just a chart of everything I just talked about. So just to recap a little bit, healthcare waivers are for unlicensed healthcare positions. It's only needed if you have a disqualifying conviction. So some convictions aren't going to be a problem. If you do have a disqualifying conviction, if it's just one, you wait 1 year for misdemeanor, 3 years for felony, and then that goes up depending on how many disqualifying convictions you have. This works wherever you are convicted. So if you don't have any convictions in Illinois, but you have convictions in Indiana, for example, and you're still trying to get a CNA job in Illinois, this healthcare waiver can still help you. Okay. Certificate of good conduct is the same thing. So if you have a conviction outside of Illinois and you are trying to get a job at a school here inside of Illinois, the certificate of good conduct can still help you with that. So these two things are really helpful if you have out-of-state convictions and you're still trying to get a job in Illinois. The certificate of relief from disabilities, remember this was the one that's for those specific professional licenses that I was talking about. This is only for Illinois convictions. Only for Illinois convictions. And then also the difference, no wait period for the certificate of relief from disabilities and 2-year wait period for the certificate of good conduct. So that's all of our alternative forms of relief. I'm going to turn now to just kind of talking a little bit about expungement and sealing, kind of knowing your rights if you have a conviction. Right now, what your current rights are having a conviction. Take a second. All right, can I get a show of hands for anyone who's awake? Who has heard of expungement and sealing? Anybody know the difference? Yeah?
Expungement, certain jobs can still see it. Sealed mean they can't see it at all.
It is the exact opposite, but you have the definitions correct.
Okay.
You got the definition, so she's right. So expungement is nobody can see it ever. Sealing is certain government employers can see it. Right. So you got it. All right, so the effect of expungement and sealing. If you go and you are looking in the clerk system, you're at the clerk's office, they've got the computers for you, you type in your name, nothing should show up if your record has been entirely expunged or sealed. Expunged records are actually destroyed. So I didn't know this until I started doing this work, but expungement, I looked up in a different dictionary, it actually means to destroy, so you're actually getting rid of the records. They're gone. Sealed records are not destroyed. They're exactly what you think about when you're thinking of sealing something. It's like putting a piece of red tape over a folder and hiding it away. It's still there, it's just only certain people can then open it again and take a look at it. So the people who can still see it are the Illinois State Police, so that's important. If you are thinking about going through this process because you want to get your FOID card, just keep in mind that the Illinois State Police will still be able to access your record no matter what, if it's been sealed. They can't access expunged records, but they can access sealed. The court will always have access to it. And then any government agencies that can get a fingerprint-based background report. So again, if you want to work for a school, the CTA, that's a common one, if you want to work for the Parks District, and they get you a fingerprint-based background report, they will be able to see your sealed convictions, your sealed felony convictions, excuse me, not your sealed misdemeanor. So if you have misdemeanor convictions and they're sealed, nobody's ever going to see them again. The only convictions that are still going to be visible to Illinois State Police, the court, government agencies that you're trying to work for are sealed felony convictions. All right. So as promised, your current rights if you have convictions. Under the Illinois Department of Human Rights, the Illinois Human Rights Act, employers are not allowed to ask you about an arrest record, expunged, or sealed records. So if you were arrested and you were never charged, the employer who's asking you, on your application process, they cannot ask you about that arrest. If you were charged, and then that later led to a conviction, they can ask you about it. Or if you were charged and it was later dismissed, they can still ask you about it. The only thing they can't ask you about are arrests that never led to being charged. So if you never went to court, they probably can't ask you about it. Also, if you go through the expungement and sealing process and your records have been expunged or sealed, employers, private employers cannot ask you about those. Government employers can ask you about your sealed felony convictions, like I talked about on the last slide. But anybody else, I keep coming back to Amazon, that I know it's a really popular employer, they would not be able to see any of your expunged or sealed records. If you have an issue with this, you can file a complaint online for free with the Illinois Department of Human Rights, so you can report an employer for breaking the law if they're asking you about things they shouldn't be asking about. All right, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. This is really, really, really important. You hear nothing else today, hear this. If you are applying for a job and they run a background report, you are legally entitled to see your background report. You have to ask the employer to give you that background report, and then you are allowed to get a copy of it. They are required to give you a copy of it. And this is really important because sometimes those background companies they're using, they're third-party background companies. They're somebody who pulled data from the Chicago public system 30 years ago. The data is stale, and they are acting like it's updated, and they're sending out these reports. So you need to look at that record and make sure everything on there is you, and make sure all of those records are yours. That's the best piece of advice I can give you. If somebody's running a background report on you, you should look at that background report. If there are any errors on that background report, the background company is required by federal law to fix it. So if you tell them that there's something wrong and you go down to the Cook County Courthouse and you get proof that what they have is wrong, they are required by federal law to fix it. All right. Man the box laws in Illinois. In Illinois, if an employer has 15 or more employees, they are not allowed to ask you about your criminal record on the initial application. So the first application you fill out. If you go on to the next stage of that application, that's when they can ask you about your criminal record. So personally, I'm not sure how helpful this is. I'm looking, I don't know. I haven't found it to be very helpful.
I can just say, only because I used to work in human resources, is that different employers, for whatever reason, do different things. Sometimes you might not see an application until literally they've offered you the job and they're handing it to you. And you might feel a little less forthcoming filling out anything at that point, or it could be the reverse where like you just like, well, hey, they've already offered me the job, and I'm filling out the application, I can be honest. But it's kind of dishonest of them to kind of withhold any application until after they offer you the job to run a background check and then basically snatch back the offer. So I don't know how that works, but I know that different employers do different things.
Yeah, so you could get a job offer, because the application didn't ask about your background. You could get the job offer and then they'll run a background report on you a couple days later and then they'll rescind the offer and send you home. I've had lots of people call me about that.
Alright, so, what if he asked me to court, but he wasn't convicted of the charge?
If it was dismissed,
Yeah.
they can ask you about that. But that, if it was dismissed, it's likely eligible for an expungement.
Okay.
Any other questions on this slide? You got your hand up?
Yeah, does that mean, does that mean you can deny from a job for something that got dismissed, if they ask you about it?
Hang on. I don't think so. I'm trying to remember. I don't know if this is entirely updated. I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that it has to be a conviction for them to deny you the job. I'm pretty sure. But if you hit me up afterwards, I will look that up and confirm for you. I have a different presentation where that information is, and I'll double check. All right. Apparently we have some true or false questions. If anybody wants to join us here. So employers cannot ask on the job application, have you ever been convicted? True, false, or maybe? Yes, no, or maybe?
Maybe.
Maybe. I think that's correct. Yes, so maybe, sometimes they can. In Illinois, if they have 15 or more employees, they cannot ask you if you've been convicted, if it's a small business. Fewer than 15 employers, they can ask you if you've ever been convicted. An exception is if the employer is governed by a law that says who they can and cannot hire based on a criminal conviction. So that's what we were talking about before. So that's, again, Board of Education, schools, Parks Department, CTA. You know, CTA is not government owned technically, right? They're like adjacent, but like they still have a lot of statutes that govern whether you can work for them. How do you know if there's a law governing that employment? So generally, if you're applying for a job and they ask you to get a fingerprint background report in order to continue working there, generally they are statutorily allowed to get that. Even arrests that show up on an FBI background report will not show up on your Illinois State Police report because the Illinois State Police report will only show convictions to an employer that's legally allowed to see them. So if McDonald's is trying to see your sealed felony convictions, the Illinois State Police report will not reveal those sealed felony convictions to them. They'll only reveal them to an agency or an employer that is legally entitled to see your sealed felony convictions. DCFS is another one I forgot to mention, as far as an employer that can get the fingerprint report. All right. You can report violations of employers asking if you were convicted on the application to the Illinois Department of Labor online. It's something you can Google if you're interested in reporting that. Yeah.
Okay, if it's over 7 years, you don't have to put it on there.
If it's, no matter what, if it's an employer with more than 15 employees, they cannot ask you whether you've been convicted on an application. So if your conviction is older than 7 years,
Or 10.
yeah, it depends on the conviction, right? But then some employers cannot deny you that job if the conviction's old enough. But it depends on the conviction, right? So that's more specific.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, no, or maybe. Employers are required to give you a copy of a background check used in a decision to not hire or promote you.
Yes.
Yes, they are. So again, if you are getting a background check run on you, please, please, please ask them to give you a copy of it. That is good practice. All right, so under the Illinois Human Rights Act, employers cannot refuse to hire or promote you based on mere arrests. They also cannot ask questions about arrests, expunge or sealed records in writing or orally. So they also can't ask you that in an interview if they're trying to get around the like, well, I didn't put it down on the application. They also can't ask you in an interview. They can only ask about convictions, but may consider cases where there was a finding of guilt if they learn from somebody else. So unfortunately, this came up with one of my clients the other day. They applied for a job. It was a private employer. That private employer was not legally entitled to see their sealed felony convictions, but that employer's good friends with an FBI agent. I swear this is what actually happened. The FBI agent ran a background report. I have no idea if they were allowed to do that. Probably not. They ran the background report and told the employer that this person has sealed felony convictions. Because the Illinois Human Rights Act has this exception, which is that the employer can learn about it from somebody else, they were allowed to be denied the position. So I will say that that is obviously really rare. I don't know too many people who have best buds in the FBI who are like running secret background reports. It's just to show you that the best course forward for you if you have a criminal case is to try and get it expunged or sealed, because there's no exceptions to this. If it's an expunged or sealed record here, or excuse me, an expunged record, they'll never be able to see it. And if it's sealed, there's a really, really good chance that they're never going to see it, right? Most people don't have secret best friends in the FBI getting background reports sent to them. I just want you to know that there are exceptions, and that it's not, a bulletproof law here that protects you from everything. Okay. Talked about this a little bit. These are just the details of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I don't know if it's really that important that you know how many days you have to wait. But again, if they're not going to hire you based on a background report, they have to give you a copy of it before they choose not to hire you, before they fire you, before they refuse to promote you. So always get a copy. This is a common issue. So you may get a copy of your rap sheet at the Chicago Police Department. You may go down and get your Illinois State Police report or your FBI background report. And you may look at it and go, this isn't my case, or I never did that, or something along those lines. It happens. I will say this has problems with background checks. This happens really irregularly, I'll say. Most of them are accurate. But if you do see a case on there that isn't yours, there's a way to get that fixed. It being incomplete is more common. Especially if you had arrests outside Chicago, if you had arrests outside of Illinois, it's more likely that we're not going to be able to find that unless you tell us. And so it's really, really important to be completely honest with your attorney, because the prosecutor in these cases has access to the National Background Service. You know that system that they look at when you're applying for a gun permit? The prosecutors have access to that, and we do not. So if you have a record outside of Illinois and you didn't tell me, the prosecutor's going to know, I'm not going to know, and I can't help you. So being as honest with your attorney as you can is the way to go. Common names is an issue. I got a client, John Smith, Denise, a lot of Williamses with the same date of birth as you. Sometimes they'll end up on your background report. It might not be you. We can help you fix it. If you have gone through the process of getting your record expunged and sealed and it's still showing up, definitely contact an attorney or go down to the clerk's office. That can be fixed. Definitely be fixed. All right, true, false, maybe. Criminal records are no longer recorded after 7 years.
Maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, all right. Good job. So, a background check company can report non-convictions for 7 years. So it's a non-conviction, that's that dismissal, those dismissed cases we were talking about. So for 7 years, that background company can still report that you were arrested even if you weren't convicted, and that case was dismissed, they can report that. Convictions are reported forever and ever and ever unless they are sealed by a court. Okay. Illinois Uniform Conviction Information Act only allows the Illinois State Police to report convictions unless authorized by law. So in theory, people should not be able to see your dismissed records if they're getting their background report from the Illinois State Police. But private companies are definitely looking at your dismissed cases because it is public record. So even if the Illinois State Police can't report it, those dismissed cases are public record. Anybody can go online and find them. And so the fact that the Illinois State Police can only report convictions, it's not that helpful. All right, know what to say. So the best thing for me to be able to help you is to know what's on your criminal record, but it's also really important for you. So if you are unsure how many arrests you've had, or if you don't remember, they were a really long time ago, it's $16 to go get a copy of your background report, and you will know what that employer is going to look at. So if you're armed with your information, you're going to know what they're going to look at, and you can preemptively talk to them about it, right? You can be like, I know this is on here. I've done X, Y, and Z since this conviction, please hire me. Or I've got my certificate of good conduct, please hire me. But always good to know what's on there. I got ahead of myself. Mitigation just means like, tell them, hey, I've been doing really well since then. I've been to therapy. I took anger management training. I got sober. I've been attending AA meetings. You know, whatever it was that your conviction was for, if you're talking to somebody and you're talking to an employer, talking to a judge, you want to be able to show them, I wouldn't do that anymore. I don't do that anymore. Or I was young. I was, you know, whatever the reason was, why you got into that in the first place, mitigating it is just showing them that you wouldn't do that anymore, that you're not that person anymore, or that that was just wrong place, wrong time, one thing in your life, you've moved on. Know your rights under state and federal law. We walked through that. Know how to answer the question. The question is, have you ever had a conviction? That question should not be on an application in the first place. So if it is on there, report it to the Illinois Department of Labor.
Now you say, have you ever been convicted?
Okay. No, I just wasn't sure if you had something else. All right. Pursue legal relief when eligible. This is just us telling you, if you're eligible to get your record expunged or sealed, please do that. There is a free help desk that Green Green Legal Aid runs. It's at the Daily Center, downtown. We're on the 10th floor. We're there on Mondays and Wednesdays. You can also go online to our website. You just Google CGLA and go to our website. There's a big Apply Now button, and we can help you get your record expunged or sealed for free. It's all free. So if you think you might be eligible for that, highly recommend you apply. Police records, this is how you go and get them. This time is not correct, please ignore that. They are open Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday from 8:30 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. And it's $16 to get both your Chicago rap sheet and your Illinois State Police report. So just like I said, always best to know what's on your own record so you're prepared if you're getting questions. And so you can kind of preempt any issues. You can go get that done. If you don't want to go down to 35th and Michigan to get your fingerprints taken, okay, you can go to Accurate Biometrics or any licensed live scan vendor. It's going to cost you a little bit more to get that done. Okay. So the question is still going to come, right? If any of you have ever applied for a job, you know that the fact that the law says they're not supposed to ask you, they're probably still going to ask you in the interview. They're probably still going to try and get away with figuring out how to figure out if you have a criminal conviction. And so just remember, you can always report that to the Illinois Department of Human Rights, but also know that there is no federal law that says you can only ask about convictions that are over a certain number of years old. So there's no cutoff point for convictions. They can always ask you about a conviction. That cutoff point, remember the 7 years, that's just for dismissed cases. So background companies can report dismissed cases for 7 years, and that's it. The point of advocacy. So this is advocacy from me, an attorney. Advocacy for yourself. Highly, strongly encourage you to advocate for yourself here. You know what's on your record, you can advocate for yourself. You know your life better than I ever will, right? You will know how you got into that situation for that conviction. You will know what you've been doing with your life since your conviction. And so you're gonna be the best advocate for yourself to get your record expunged or sealed, to get these certificates we've been talking about, these waivers we've been talking about. And so if you know what's on your record, if you're open with an attorney that's helping you, or you're open with a judge that you're trying to convince, that's the best way to advocate for yourself moving forward. It's to know what's on your record and to know yourself. All right, that's all I've got.